Did you know you only need 4 essential techniques in order to know how to knit? I'm going to take you through each one with some tips for beginners, and stay tuned for one bonus technique at the end. All we need for supplies is our yarn, a pair of needles, a scissors, and a tapestry needle. I'm also going to have a link to a project for you at the very end of this video that's going to incorporate all these techniques. So to start off, we need to get our yarn onto our needles, and in order to do that, we need our first technique called casting on. So you're going to start off by making a slip knot. And where do you make the slip knot in your yarn? Because for this cast on, we're going to need to leave some tail. So if you have a project, make sure you look and see what the final dimensions are, because say it's 4 inches, what you're going to want to do is measure out 4 inches on your yarn and then multiply that by 3, and then that's how much tail you're going to need. And you make your slip knot in the middle of that. So you can make a slip knot any way you want, but here's how I do it. I take my 2 fingers, I lay my yarn across my fingers, wrap it around once, and go underneath through the back and tuck the yarn through and pull it, and there's your slip knot. So you can put that on your needle, and that is actually your first stitch. So if your pattern calls for 10 stitches, you've just done 1. Now, in order to make the other 9, what you would do is grab these 2 pieces of yarn with your pinky and ring finger like that. And then stick your thumb and forefinger through those 2 pieces. And then you pull your needle down to make this V shape. Now go underneath this piece of yarn by your thumb and underneath the one by your finger and pull through by your thumb. I'm going to show you that again. So grab these 2 pieces of yarn, stick your thumb and forefinger through, pull your needle down, go underneath the furthest by your thumb, underneath this one on the inside by your forefinger. Don't pull up, but pull through this hole. And then just continue casting on however many stitches you need. And if your cast on edge feels tight, you can go ahead and use a larger size needle to cast on than your pattern calls for. You can actually use 2 needles and then pull one out when you're finished. So now we have our hobby's namesake, the knit stitch. And to do the knit stitch, make sure you are not working with your tail yarn. You want to be working with the yarn that's attached to the ball. So take your needle, hold your needle with the stitches in your non-dominant hand, put the empty one up through the first stitch, and make sure your working yarn is in the back. You don't want it in the front. And you wrap around counterclockwise. Take the needle down through the stitch on the left and up off the needle. So again, that's up through the stitch. Make sure that the needle you're knitting with comes up behind the needle in your left hand. Wrap around counterclockwise and bring that down and up off the needle. Getting your tension right is something that will take practice, and having an even tension is how you keep your stitches even and uniform. So if you feel good about this, we can move on to the next technique. Otherwise, keep practicing. So now that we're done with a row, you want to turn your work properly. So you see how this yarn makes it seem like it could go this way? Well, then it's going to create these 2 stitches. That's actually the stitch below. So you want to make sure that your yarn only has this 1 stitch. You see this big kind of loopy stitch? Make sure that you don't knit into that. So now we're going to move on to the purl stitch. If you've learned the knit stitch, you can absolutely do the purl stitch because it's basically the opposite of the knit stitch. So the knit stitch, you go up through the back And the purl stitch, you're going to go down through the front and keep your yarn in the front instead of the back. And then you're going to still wrap counterclockwise, and then you pull up and off the needle. Again, that's down through the front. Wrap your yarn around counterclockwise and pull up off the needle. And what people don't realize when they first start knitting is how many cool things they can do with just knit purl combinations. You really don't need to know a bunch of fancy stitches in order to make some really cool, intricate patterns. So with just those 3 techniques, I was able to make this little swatch, and you can see here I have 2 different patterns. This is made by knitting every single row, and then in the middle here is your classic knit pattern called stockinette stitch, and that's made by doing every other row, knit row, purl row, knit row, purl row. And so now we have to get our project off of our needles. So I'm going to show you how to cast off, or sometimes it's called binding off. So what you want to do, and you can use a larger needle to do this if you want, to keep it a little looser. And first, just start off by knitting 2 stitches just like normal. Now what you want to do is take this first stitch and pull it up over that second stitch and drop it off the needle. Now we're going to knit 1 more stitch so that there are 2 stitches. Take the first stitch, pull it up, and drop it up and off the needle. And you just continue on like that. Go ahead and use your fingers if that helps too. Just like with casting on, there are many ways to bind off, but I like to try to keep my cast on and cast off edges looking similar. And this is a good match to the cast on we went over in the beginning. Now we're getting down there. You have 1 stitch left to knit and drop it off the needle. And when there's just 1 left, go ahead and cut your project from your ball of yarn and then pull up, and then your project is disconnected from your yarn. So now we can move on to our bonus technique. So now you've finished your project, but you're left with all of these ends just kind of dangling out, and this is where our bonus technique comes in. I'm going to show you a nearly invisible way to weave these in. So what you want to do, flip your project over and put one of these ends on your tapestry needle. Now I just want to show you before we start, you see these ridges that are kind of like, you've got this wave thing going on. And these waves are made up of umbrellas and smiles, I like to call them. So we're going to weave in through those. So just kind of get your needle up a little closer into the middle. And then what you're going to do is trace around this umbrella, and you'll end up at this smile, and you're going to go through that. And then it's pointing at an umbrella right underneath it, and go through that as well. Now, right next to it is a smile. Trace around that, end up at the umbrella, go up through that, and then up through the smile that you came out of before. And just continue doing that around the umbrella, down through the smile, down through the umbrella you came out of. And what we're doing here is we're tracing around the stitch that's already there. And I like to kind of just go as far as I can with however much tail I have. And then when you're all done, you can just repeat with the rest and snip. Look how nice that looks. Check out this video for this easy to knit dishcloth. I go through every single stitch with you so you're not going to get lost, and we'll go through all the techniques again. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this tutorial.